right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our evening virtual lecture. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We are thrilled to have this event with everyone. My name is Chloe Green. I serve as the Public Programs and Outreach Manager here at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, and I am your Zoom host for this evening's program, our Lord Baltimore Fellow virtual lecture, Experience, Adventures, and Escape of Richard J. Potter, Three Black Apprenticeships in Antebellum, Maryland. This program is being recorded and will be made available for public viewing on our virtual program archive in the weeks following tonight's runtime. This Zoom webinar is equipped with a Q&A chat function. If you have any questions or comments for our panelists, please use this Q&A chat, and we will reserve time at the end of the program for your questions. I will now kick us off by introducing our moderator for the evening. I am very excited to give a warm welcome to Martina Cotto. Martina serves as the Vice President of Research and France Merrick Director of the H. Furlong Baldwin Library. Martina also just got back from traveling, so we are extra appreciative for her time this evening. So thank you so much, Martina, for being here. I'm going to go ahead and pass the program to you, and I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Nothing like jet lag to get you started with the season of public programming here at MCHC. So I'm very excited to be here tonight and to welcome you all on this almost spring evening for our first fellowship lecture of our public programming season. I want to introduce you to our fellow and our speaker tonight. Her name is In Jang, and she is a PhD candidate in history at the State University of New York at Binghamton. Her research project for her doctoral dissertation explored the lives and experiences of working class white and Black children in antebellum Baltimore. And in this respect, Youngin is looking into how the categories of race, class, and gender contributed to affect the daily lives of working class children, focusing on the aspects of work, crime, and sexuality. By exploring our collections related to poverty, labor, slavery, social reforms, and education in antebellum Baltimore, she's interrogating how the historical traces of working class children also affected the meaning of American childhood. Youngin has been a Lord Baltimore Research Fellow for 2024-2025 at the H. Furlong Baldwin Library since June 2024. And she has about 2 more months left in her fellowship. And in addition to this public talk, Youngin will also be writing a post for our library blog called Underbelly. So please check back on our website for that. And as Chloe mentioned earlier, tonight's talk is titled Experience, Adventures, and Escape of Richard J. Potter, Three Black Apprenticeships in Antebellum, Maryland. We will have time for your questions at the end of Young's talk, so please use the question and answer feature on the bottom of your screen. We will also keep adding some useful information for you in the chat, and we would love to hear where you're coming from tonight, so please feel free to message each other and us. And with that, Youngin, may I invite you to join us?
Hello.
Hi. Take it away. The floor is yours. I will be back at the end of your talk.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you through this screen. My name is Young In. Again, the same. I'm a PhD candidate in history department of the Binghamton University, and I'm so a little nervous, but also excited to be here and tell you my portion of my research. So, as Martina just told, my dissertation explores how the race, class, gender differentiated working class children's experience and work, especially who lived in Baltimore before the Civil War. But today I'll focus on free black apprentices, especially following the narrative of Richard J. Potter. who was bound as an apprentice at the age of 10 and was kidnapped but managed to escape. Okay, so I found these pamphlets from Maryland Center for History and Culture when I tried to find just anything about children and apprentices. So there are three editions, different editions of Richard's memoir I found from Maryland Center. Richard published the first one in 1866, this one, when he was about 24 years old. And in this initial edition, Richard did not include people's full name in his narrative. But and this edition is quite relatively shorter than the other two. But the next pamphlet I found from Maryland Center was published in 1875, but it seems like Richard wrote this second edition in 1869, depending on based on this introduction. And he explained here is that he put some people's full name in this second edition with the permission. But the last one I found from was published in 1877. And I think this one has some typo because this pamphlet published in 1877, but here in the introduction he wrote that this is from August 1st, 1860. So there's some typos, but I think at least there are three different editions of Richard Porter's memoir. And like I told you before, the first one is relatively shorter than the second and third one, and the second and third one is almost identical. So for the story I'll tell you, especially the narrative of Richard J. Porter, was mostly based on the second one. So I'll go back here. So Richard J. Porter was born in Greensboro, Caroline County, Maryland on April 10th, 1842. His parents were slaves, but married before Richard was born. According to Richard, his mother, Sidney Porter, belonged to William Porter of Porter's Landing. Afterward, she was sold twice, and her last master, named Thomas Udeman, married her. His father, Stanford Porter, was a blacksmith, a trade he had learned while he was enslaved, and he became freed at the age of 25. And Richard was apprenticed to Mr. Skinner, a farmer who lived at Porter's Landing. And Richard was 10 years old when he was bound as an apprentice, so probably in 1852. And at the time, Richard's family, his parents and his younger sister lived at Greensboro, but he lived with Mr. Skinner, his master, in Porter's Landing. So here is a Google map I stole from Google. So this is Caroline County, and here's Stanton City. And down here around Williston, this is Porter's Landing, where his mother was enslaved and his first initial master, Mr. Skinner, lived. But when he was apprenticed and lived with Mr. Skinner, his parents and family lived in Greensboro. So Richard, about 10 years old, very young boy, lived very far from his family. And since implanted into the American colonies, the apprenticeship system was to resolve the problem of children's dependency without proper protection, care, and guidance from their parents. According to the 1903 Act for Better Regulation of Apprentices, the main goal of apprenticeship was to prevent poor children, orphans, and illegitimate children who are left destitute of support from becoming useless or depraved members of society. So this law empowered justice of urban courts and justice of the peace and fathers to find out children in their custody as apprentices to some manufacturer, mechanic, mariners, handicrafts, or other person who are able to give those children instruction in literacy and useful skills, like a trade school for children. And legally, these child apprentices were bound until they arrived at the age of legal majority. So 21 for boys and 16 or 18 for girls. But from the early 19th century, Maryland laws regarding apprenticeships began to change depending on race of children and their parents. The 1808 Act to supplements to the 1793 Act added both the child or children of lazy, indolent, and worthless free blacks as another category of children who shall be bound out as apprentices. 10 years later, the 1818 Act authorized the judges of the urban courts to indenture, quote, any child or children of free Negroes or mulattoes who are not at service or learning a trade or employed to learn some useful trades. But it was the Act of 1839 entitled to provide for the better regulation of the free Negroes and mulatto children. So here, unlike this first series of laws, which is about regulating apprentices, later these two acts is specifically about to better regulation of the free Black children that put a new cornerstone to racialized apprenticeship in 19th century Maryland. So by this law, 1839 Act, children of any free Negro or mulatto were to be indentured to some white person to learn to labor, not useful skills, just learn to labor, depending on the judge's decisions. Consequently, this Act of 1839 made it lawfully possible and even more accessible for the court to take any free Black children from the custody of their parents and put them under the control of white masters and mistresses. Furthermore, the term of servitude of Black apprentices was legally eligible to be extended and sold to anyone within Maryland, according to this 1839 Act, if those free Black apprentices were abscond or run away by any reason except the ill treatment or fraud of the master. Alas, the Act of 1844 finalized this process of racialized apprenticeships by allowing any masters to sell the unexpired period of Black apprentices, servitude, who are bound under the laws of Maryland, just to any person residing in the same county, if the courts agree to. So as these laws fully disclosed, just for free Black children, the apprenticeship system had changed into a legal mechanism, putting them into the legal limbo of unfree labor, if not slavery. White apprentices only affected by the 1793 Act and bound out due to their parents' incapability to support them, and they were promised to learn some useful trade from mechanics or merchant. However, by the late 1830s and early 1840s, any Black children, free Black children, could be bound to some white person to learn how to work, and their terms of apprentices could be extended and sold, unlike white apprentices. So while the extension of Black apprenticeships became legalized by the Act of 1839, there were no cases regarding extensions left in the Register of Wills from Baltimore County and City until the 1850s. So even if Richard J. Potter's case, he from Caroline County, other cases for my dissertation is largely just only coming from Baltimore County and cities because my dissertation narrowly focused on Baltimore County and City. So other cases than Richard J. Potter from today's talk is from Baltimore City and County urban courts. So in the 1850s, the urban courts of Baltimore County and City ordered 46 Black boys and 8 Black girls to serve their masters for a longer period than their original indentures stated. And the unexpired terms of 18 children were extended more than once, up to 4 times. Following the Act of 1844, 137 free Black children's apprenticeships were sold and transferred with the approval of the courts between 1845 and 1859. And 33 Black apprentices among those 137 free Black children, 33 Black apprentices were transferred more than once. Oh, here. So yeah, there's one case I found that the boys' apprenticeships were sold and transferred like 5 times. So the Act of 1844, the one that make it possible to just sell and transfer of the Black apprenticeships to just anyone live in the Maryland, did not require masters to provide excuses or explanations when they applied for selling the remaining times of apprenticeships. And masters and mistresses did not need to explain why they sold their Black apprentices their time of servitude, as paternalistic slaveholders would often feel obliged to do. By doing so, Black apprentices' servitude turned into commodities that masters and mistresses could quickly dispose of for some amounts of cash. So when Richard was apprenticed to Mr. Skinner in 1852, the apprenticeship system for free Black children in Maryland already turned into something very different from the trade school, like for white children. And Richard wrote in his memoir, he was apprenticed to Mr. Skinner when he was 10. And he wrote he was born in 1842. So that's why I said like it should be 1852 when he was apprenticed to Mr. Skinner. The interesting thing is Richard already lived with Skinner before 1852. So this is the 1850 census I found. And here, Batchton Skinner, farmer, and here Richard Potter, 11 years old, free Black boy. And this 1850 census shows that Richard lived with Skinner in 1850. And his age was listed as 11, not 8. And there are at least two possibilities in my mind. So Richard was born not 1842, but 1840, and bound as an apprentice in 1850. So he's about 10 or 11 years old. Or his age listed 11 as here is incorrect. So actually he was 8 in 1850, and he already lived with Skinner even before Richard was officially legally bound as apprentice to Skinner. Then why would Richard need to live apart from his family when his parents were still alive? It seems, in my opinion, that Stanford and Sidney Potter, Richard's parents, could not support all their children. So Richard and his younger sister, Sarah. Yeah, this is the census for Stanford Potter. And he was a blacksmith. So here's Sidney, his wife, Richard's mother. Sarah, at this time, 7 years old. So younger sister, Richard's younger sister. And there's another man, John Wright. So I guess he lived with them and worked with Stanford Porter as a blacksmith. But at least here, and here there's no like real estate or any property listed in the census that Stanford Porter owned. So I assume this is because Stanford and Sidney Potter could not support fully their two children, so they have to put their eldest child, even if he's still very young, have to put him into the other household, like a white household. Yeah. So consequently, like many other Black children, free Black children, Richard might have to begin working at an early age. And since Skinner was a farmer, Richard may have been apprenticed to learn farming, or he could have worked as waiter or a house servant, the very common trade that Black boys would bound to learn under the apprenticeships. After Richard was bound as an apprentice to Skinner, Skinner put Richard to work for another man who lived in the same town, Edward Taylor. But this Edward Taylor treated him very harshly. So still at this point, Richard was bound. Richard's master is Skinner, but Skinner hired his apprentice out to some other guy. And when Stanford, Richard's father, attempted to cancel Richard's apprenticeship to Skinner due to this practice of hiring out and mistreatment, Skinner sold the remaining times of Richard's apprenticeship, approximately 10 to 11 years, to Taylor. Later. So I do not know yet how much Taylor paid Skinner for Richard's service as an apprentice for at least 10 years, but based on the remaining records from Baltimore City and County urban courts before 1860, the lowest price paid was $15 for the remaining 4 years of apprenticeships of a 14-year-old Black girl named Ellen Mitchell in 1847. So this is the original indenture of Ellen Mitchell to this Julia Wamling. So here in 1845. So here, and you can see here, actually it was Ellen Mitchell's father who agreed to bind his teenage daughter to this white mistress to learn housekeeping. And there is a signature or just mark of his father, this young teenage Black girl, and white mistress. And and this is the court order after 2 years to approve that the mistress could sell the remaining time of Ellen Mitchell's apprentice to this guy named Christopher Duval for the sum of $15 in 1847. So this is the lowest price I could find from the remaining records from the Baltimore City and County urban courts. But actually after that, another 2 years later, this Ellen Mitchell's second master sold the remaining times of this Black girl's apprenticeships to another person. And in this court orders, there's no mention of how much he paid, but at least for this girl, her indentures were sold twice. And the highest price I found was paid to buy a 15-year-old Caroline Sawyer's apprenticeship. So originally, Sawyer was bound to Casper Mance in Frederick County in 1853 to serve him for 3 years. Then Mance brought Sawyer with him when he's moving into Baltimore City with the permission of the Circuit Court of the Frederick County. So here we can see that the People's Master should get a permission from the urban courts to when they move to another place with their apprentices. And on August 25th of the following year, the Baltimore City urban courts extended Sawyer's times of apprenticeships for extra 2 years to compensate for considerable expenses Sawyer put to Mance by running away. On the next day, the urban courts approved the extension of the Sawyer's apprenticeships. Her master sold the remaining 4 years, extended 4 years of Sawyer's service, at which now she had to work until she became 20, to Wilson Cole for $200. It only took 5 days until this second master sold Sawyer's servitude to another person for $250. So that's the highest price I found based on the Baltimore City and County urban courts. And as Sawyer's case illustrates, Richard's apprenticeship only sold once. The combination of salient expansion of Black apprentices' servitude shows how the apprenticeship system became a very handy tool to keep free Black children under the legal limbo of unfree labor. And this repeated process of salient extension of Black apprenticeships optimized how free Black children's bodies and times became the source of creating labor and capital for white masters and mistresses. And that extension of the unexpired terms of 46 Black children I found from the sources meant that at least 46 children, free Black children, attempted to free themselves by running away. It was rare that free Black apprentices explained themselves why they decided to run away. Oh, and this is one of the newspaper advertisements saying $20 reward, run away. And it doesn't say this boy is an apprentice boy, but this Black boy, Paul Bill Waters, about 16 years old, he ran away and mastered from Calvert County. And they believe this boy is hiding somewhere in the city. And this is another advertisements for Runaway, this time specifically for Free Black Apprentice. So Runaway or Entice from Me. This Thursday from 8048, this Black girl named Harriet Elizabeth Quinn, age about 12 years old. And she had a blue calico frock, light clothes shawl, and straw bonnet trimmed with mourning ribbon. This girl was found to me, Miss Anne Shelf, by the urban courts, and she's under impression that she was enticed away, run away. This is from 1848, and actually I found the original indenture of this girl to this mistress. So she was urban unemployed, and she was bound to this lady until she became 18 years to learn plain sewing and just doing the housework. And actually the mistress are to teach this girl how to read. And there is also freedom due for $20. So there are running away is quite common for every apprentices or just any workers. But in case of apprentices, only free Black apprentices were punished by extension of the terms of servitude if they caught after running away. And it was rare. And it was rare that free Black apprentices explained themselves why they decided to run away, even though it is not impossible to assume. So, for example, in his petition asking for an extension of the servitude of his 18-year-old Black apprentice John Stevenson, Thomas Shepard left some clues why his apprentice Stevenson ran away. So Stevenson was about 12 when he was indentured as a waiter to John Stanley with the consent of his mother and Stevenson in 1845. 4 years later, Stanley sold the remaining times of Stevenson's servitude to his master who petitioned the court, Thomas Shepard. And 2 years later, Shepard requested an extension to the Baltimore City urban courts because Stevenson's caused troubles and expense, and he is very in gratitude to his master, and he's doing very bad conduct. So according to Shepard, Stevenson had run away twice for no other cause than correction for his imprudence and bad conduct, such as cursing his master and going out at night after all his household had gone to bed, or just threatening his master, threatening people that he would burn out the master's property. But Shepard further complained in his petition that when he put Stevenson's at the Western Watch House, like kind of not jail, but 4 or 5 times, he discovered that Stevenson had, quote, made the most shameful of use of clothing and my property, and bragged to others that he would do as he choose and don't belong to his master anyhow. And the court only relying on Shepard's application. The urban court orders Stevenson to serve his master Shepard for the further term of 3 years until the age of 24, and approved the sale of Stevenson's remaining time from Shepard to another person, Adolphus Shepard. And 3 years later, Stevenson's apprenticeship was sold again to Charles Myers. So here's another process, another patterns we can see: extension and sold again. And while court's record do not show Stevenson's reason for running away, another case of the free Black apprentice, William H. Riley, reveals why he ran away from his master, John H. Herbert. So in 1858, Herbert filed a petition that his 18-year-old Black apprentice Riley ran away without any cause or provocation. After recapturing his apprentice at a cost about $81, Herbert brought Riley with him to the Baltimore City urban courts to request an extension of his apprenticeships. At the hearing, Riley the 18-year-old free black apprentice boy, admitted that he had left his master for about 1 year, but rationalized that he ran away due to Harvard's violation of his indenture, even though Harvard insisted that his running away was without any cause of provocation. So according to Riley, Harvard forced him put into employment entirely different from his indenture as a waiter, and whipped him and threatened to compel service not required by the indenture. So here Riley explained to the court that he ran away because his master violated the indentures, but despite Riley's clear evidence, Harvard despite this Riley's explanation, the court nonetheless sided with his master and extended Riley's apprenticeships by 2 years. But other than this violation of apprenticeships as a contract, ill treatment and a lack of essential support in food and clothing were common complaints for all apprentices, white or blacks, including Richard J. Potter. So according to Richard, while his first master Skinner treated him, quote, kindly, Taylor, the person he was hired to work, and then now he's a second master, Taylor abused him, quote, with no lenient hand. So in fall of 1852, Richard wrote, Taylor made him, quote, husk corn till midnight. And Taylor would beat him severely if he found Richard asleep or not at work between 11 and 12 p.m. And Richard's fingers, quote, had become so worn that the ears of corn and the husk would be stained with his blood. A physician named Alice Taylor gave Richard ointment for his wounded fingers, but his master took it away and did not let Richard use it. Moreover, Taylor did not beat Richard, this young, about 11-year-old boy, sufficiently and properly. Quote, my food was poor and very deficient in quantity, and sometimes in cold weather I was made to stand out shivering under the eaves to eat my scanty morsel. Unlike Stevenson and Riley, who chose to run away, Richard confided that he never attempted to run away from these harsh conditions and mistreats. Richard wrote, quote, my parents advised me to bear my hardships and do my duty bravely, assuring me a way would be open. It would release me from temporary bondage and restore me to them. Also, it was hospitality and benevolence of his neighbors that helped 11-year-old Richard kind of survive and endure this harsh treatment. Like Asma Law, the kind of rich farmer who lived in the neighborhood and helped Richard. So Law was a farmer whose real estate was recorded as $2,000 in the 1850 census. And he permitted Richard to eat with his servants. And even one of his servants, 18-year-old free black boy named Willoughby Sharp, shared his food with Richard. And sometimes when Sharp visited Richard, he also brought some food from Lowell's place and gave those food to this young poor boy. And Richard's neighbors not only helped him not to starve, but also informed his parents how the young boy lived through abuse and mistreatment. And one day Richard's parents visited Richard to see if what the neighbors told them is true. And as witness quote the evidence of ill treatment through their eyes, Richard's parents, especially his father, Stanford, requested the open courts to see the case, and Taylor was summoned to appear to answer the charge of maltreatment. And after being summoned to the open courts, Taylor told Richard that he should never see his parents again. And being kidnapped and sold into slavery was a real threat for many free black children, even just men and women. So this is the picture to show how free men from the northern free states also were to kidnapped and sold into slavery by the northern people, or just like this famous story of Solomon Northam, who was also kidnapped from the north and sold to the south. But free black children are more exposed to this danger of being kidnapped and sold into slavery. And this is the case printed in the Baltimore Sun, the newspaper, in February 1858, to show that this guy was indicted on the charge of arresting a free black boy. And he was missing, but he was found the slave depot and claiming to be free. And then he was released. So free black children, and particularly those who are apprenticed to white households and living apart from their families and parents, are still exposed to the danger of being kidnapped and sold into slavery. And the Maryland legislature acknowledged this when it passed a law regarding apprenticeships. So the 1793 Act, the first one to regulate apprentices, stated that no apprentice could be taken out of Maryland without the approval of the urban courts. The provision reflected the legislature's concern about well-being and whereabouts of children who were under the care of someone other than their families or parents. Free black apprentices, unlike white apprentices, faced the danger of being sold as slaves, particularly in the mid-19th century, when the domestic slave trade thrived along the rise of the Cotton King. And free black children around Maryland were exposed to the dangers of being kidnapped and brought into Baltimore City, where the domestic slave traders exported African Americans to the Deep South. And this is why the 1844 Act stipulated that the transactions of free black apprenticeships should be conducted only within Maryland with the approval of the urban courts. If any white masters were caught taking black apprentices out of Maryland, the urban courts could cancel the indentures. But Richard got kidnapped. So Taylor was summoned to the urban courts, and after he came back, he told Richard that you should not see your parents again. And next morning, Richard stated in his memoir, Taylor departed for Delaware and came back around midnight. And next day, a man came to see Taylor, and they went to the woods talking and remaining there until it got dark. Then Richard recollected. Taylor told him, quote, in an unusually pleasant tone, to stop work, go to a house, put on his best clothes, and go to a neighbor's house to borrow his oxen for tomorrow's work. On his way to the neighbor's house, Richard saw Mrs. Taylor's wife, coming out of the woods after giving some men in a carriage their supper. Quote, just as I heard the man in the woods, Richard wrote, I have seen the carriage and having frequently been told horrible tales of kidnappers, and I was much frightened. While Richard came back and saying to Taylor and his wife that he saw a carriage at the woods, they called him a liar and kept ordering him to go to the neighbor's house by himself. And Richard refused to go alone, and Taylor took him to the woods and told him to show the carriage. And suddenly, quote, two men jumped out from behind a large chestnut tree and seized Richard, threatening with a gun. Taylor uttered an exclamation as if very much alarmed and vanished. So the two men kidnapped Richard at night. After taking a carriage and then on a walk, they arrived in Concord, Delaware. So if the Concord and Greensboro is the same place at this time, the same place like this time. So this is Greensboro where Richard lived. Where Richard lived, and this is Concord in Delaware. So they arrived in Concord, Delaware the following day. And Richard did try to escape from the kidnapper twice on their way from Greensboro to Concord. So first night being kidnapped, Richard screamed when they approach a small village near Delaware, and one of the men covered Richard's mouth with his hand, and Richard bit it so bad that the man died later. That's what Richard was told about the man he bite. And the second time, and Richard was severely beaten over the head because of his first attempt to escape. And when they walked through the very thick pine woods, Richard tried another chance to free himself by climbing a tree. However, as soon as they found out, one of them fired his pistol towards Richard several times, only to frighten him, because, quote, they were shrewd enough to know that live niggers were far more valuable than dead ones. So they climbed up the tree and snaked Richard down, hitting him again more severely than before. And as Richard attempted to escape from his kidnappers, his parents also worked tirelessly to find their 11-year-old son. So one of Richard's kidnappers turned out later, Mr. Van, I could not find his first name, a notorious kidnapper, Richard wrote. Initially, he took Richard to his sister-in-law's house, Mrs. Cooper, and 3 days later, Van and Mrs. Cooper hid Richard in the woods and the swamp and then moved him to Van's own house. And they explained to Richard that the kidnappers were searching for him, and they just tried to move him to Philadelphia to sell him free. However, Richard later discovered that the kidnappers Van and others kidnapper referred to were his father and a constable who helped him, named James G. Redden. And after tracking down his missing son to Van's neighborhood, Stanford, his father, and Redden even searched Van's house, but could not find his son, who were hid in a large chest. And after that, Van's wife made a girl's suit for Richard to wear, and they called Richard Susan. And Richard had to work at Van's house day and night while he was held there. So he was sewing carpet and picking oakum, washing and ironing during the day. And at night, Van put Richard to work in the cornfields by lantern light. And Richard lost courage, along with his father's unwavering search and assistance from the neighbors, ultimately brought him back to his family. So Richard was kept at Van's house for about 6 months, during which his father kept looking for his son, especially in the Van's neighborhood. So the neighbor who lived there kind of has a suspicion that there is a boy who hide in this house. So one day, Van's friends warned him that a group of people, men from Denton and Georgetown, were coming to thoroughly search his house because there's strong suspicion he was hiding a boy. And Van initially planned to go oystering, but he changed his mind and stayed home, getting his gun ready. And while Van and his wife standing near the front door, Richard was stationed at the back door, at which he suddenly heard a voice to go out of the house. I just put this to page. I think it's interesting. So this first page, this first part is from the first edition, paragraphically saying that suddenly I seem to hear a voice bidding me to go out of the house. There's some voice inside him to tell him that go out the house. And the second one is from the second and third edition, and he explained more how he felt at the moment he decided to take another chance to free himself. So here, suddenly, it seemed to receive one of those sudden impulses which sometimes urge humanity on, of the love of freedom and the desire to see home and parents. So he get out from the back door, and Richard hid himself behind the smokehouse, and then run to the graveyard, and then pine woods. And from the woods, Richard saw 2 houses there, and he ran to the largest one. And there are 2 ladies standing next to the window looking at this boy wearing girl's clothes. And one of the lady asked him if he's the one who have lived with Bond's house. So she asked if he was the boy Bond kept concealed for 6 months. And Richard said, yes, ma'am. And she told Richard that he doesn't need to go any further because she's his friend. It turned out that Richard's father had been there in this largest house and requested her and her husband, Mr. Short, to keep a lookout for his son. So Richard changed into boy's clothes there and was brought to Georgetown, where he met Retton, the constable who helped his father to looking for him, and Lowe, the asthma Lowe, the very generous rich man, and the rich man who helped him, who feed him when he still lived with the Mr. Taylor, his second master. So Retton and Lowe were there to search Van's house, but now they knew that Richard was there. So they brought Richard to the Danton where his families live and waiting for. But however, only a few could afford the chance or means to escape, like Richard and Richard's father's Stanford father. So the 1850 census reported no estate for Stanford, but maybe working as a blacksmith in the rural county, Caroline County, Stanford could have earned some income, potentially accumulating at least $300 around 1853. And this is the amount that Richard wrote his father spent searching for his missing son. Yeah, so this is 1860 census, and Richard here lived with his father's house. So, and Stanford even sent someone to North Carolina in pursuit of a boy they believed might be Richard. So in 1852-53, Richard's father could spend at least $300. And by 1860, Stanford owned at least $500 in real estate and $200 in personal property. And having living parents willing to be able to pay whatever it took to locate their missing child be a luxury that many other free Black children who are apprenticed as orphans could hardly imagine, even if they are kidnapped. And I do not know whether Richard was apprenticed again after being kidnapped and rescued around 1854 when he turned like 12 years old. Stanford could have taught Richard the trade of a blacksmith by himself, as like here says blacksmith. And by 1870, now almost 30, Richard lived in Danton with his mother, Sydney Potter here, and his wife, Frederica, and 2 children. 9 years old, Stanford, probably they named him after his father, and 7 years old, Mary. And Richard's still working as a blacksmith, and he owned $300 in real estate and $100 in personal property at Danton. And he sent his son and daughter here. This part is like attended school that year, so he could send his children to school to provide them with better opportunities than he had not had at their ages. And I also found this website saying it's from Maryland Office of Tourism, and there's a house. And they say this is the house where Richard Porter wrote his narratives, and it seems there's no any sign or something, but there's a house. Hopefully I can visit it someday to just. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this talking, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Youngin. So we have a few minutes left, and we would like to encourage everybody to think of a question. And if you want our speaker to answer for you today. Is everything okay, Youngin? All right.
I think I spent too much time.
No, you're totally fine. We do have some, and maybe I can start us off with an obvious question, which is, how did you become interested in this topic? For one, right? For one, in my 6-year tenure with MCHC, I don't recall that we had a public program that focused specifically on children. So we were that much more interested in your fellowship proposal when we received it, and we just wanted to see where you would take it. So we really appreciate you presenting, this is not just the months that you've spent at the H. Furlong Baldwin Library. These are years of your research for your doctoral dissertation. And I'm just curious how it all started. How did you become interested in this subject?
Oh, I I I always want to work something about for working class people, but initially I'm interested in how for white people who didn't have any slaves or still living in the slaveholding city or place and kind of work together for the white supremacy and all the slaverism. And and then after I'm finished all my graduate seminars and coursework, and I'm looking for my dissertation topic, honestly, my advisor recommend me that recommend me, yeah, how about looking for children of the like working class people in Baltimore? Because at the time I'm looking for any subject, there's a conference in Baltimore, and she was planning to visit it there. And I have friends who live in around Baltimore, and she's kind of, why don't you go to that conference and visit some archives there and to see if there's any sources regarding children? And I did that, and very luckily I found many interesting sources I can look more into children's experience, especially the working class children. And also I wonder how free Black people lived in the slaveholding place, because we usually only, not only, but mostly talk about enslaved people's experience, which is also important, but also I'm always interested in how other people who have less attention also live in the past. So I think just all the combination of the very luck and coincidence stuff.
As dissertations tend to be.
Yeah,
Thank you
I'm
for
so
sharing
lucky
that.
so lucky to find something
Thank
to
you
write
for
about that.
sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, it is really interesting, not just because of, the records that you have been able to dive into, but because you've identified these individuals, and that's what makes these stories human and concrete, that we know who these people are. And I have two other questions, and we have one from the audience too. One is, maybe you could take us a little more into Richard's published narrative. You've told us quite a bit about it, that there were 3 editions, that, the versions changed. What was the experience of reading it like? What kind of person emerged for you of Richard as an author, and, as somebody who experienced all these things and wanted to share about them?
That's a really interesting question. At first, I found that pamphlets, especially printed version with the story of the free Black child, I was so excited to find the thing, because it's quite rare to find any sources written by these free Black people talking about their experience when they're young. So at first I was so excited, but after that, what I'm reading, I just kind of sad how this child, still very young, 8 years old, 10 years old, have to experience, live through. But also I see, because especially for the second and third edition, he wrote that this thing, this writing this work is kind of, for him, is an improvement of his, I think he used mental condition. So for him, writing his experience also very, not just writing what happened to him, but it's for himself to just the process to what he had been through. as a people of color, especially after the end of the war and after the abolition of slavery, but still there is so much going on for this newly free Black people. And he literally said that this narrative is for white people, but also for the Black people who have been through so many things. So it's really, I'm not sure, but so just that, but also I think it's really brave journey he went through, because he have to escape that house first, get a help from the neighbors when he was very young.
As a young child,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So maybe that will encourage some of our viewers tonight to also read this narrative in our library. I think we're coming up on the hour, and we have one more question. Were you able to compare the incidence of apprenticeship in Maryland versus other states or regions? And were there many other published narratives like Richard's? I'm also curious about this myself. How does Maryland compare to some other states or other regions, if you're able to answer that?
That's the thing I really want to work, hopefully after I finish my dissertation. So right now my dissertation is really focusing on Baltimore. So I can only look through the sources from the Baltimore, but later I want to look more about the experience from the other southern cities like Charleston or New Orleans, which also has a very big southern cities, slaveholding cities. So that's my next project. Right now, I'm not sure how I can answer that question. Honestly, I have no answer for that question. But for not urban city, but other rural counties in Maryland, they definitely have the Black apprenticeships, and they are also bound just to work as a house servants or farming hands, not like trade schools for the white children. So there's some differences between urban cities, Baltimore and other like East Shore coast rural counties. But I only seen Richard J. Potter's just published one, and I couldn't find any other published memoirs especially for about Black apprentices.
Well, maybe this is a summons to anybody who might have that information as well. This is how research gets done. We also have an interesting comment in the chat from Victoria McConnell, who says that the town of Denton is working to restore the Richard Potter House to its original state in the 1850s. So there's quite a bit of information there, and thank you for sharing that, Victoria. And with that,
thank you.
Yeah, we are at 7:01. I would like to invite Chloe to join us again to wrap up tonight's program. Thank you so much, Youngin. This is a really exciting time for us at MCHC, not just in terms of public programming, but because of the phase in the cycle of our fellowships, because at this moment we get to share what our fellows have been working on. So we appreciate this presentation and hope to hear more as you find out more. Chloe,
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to everybody who tuned in this evening to support Yugen and support MCHC. Yeah, thank you all so much. We hope we'll see you again in the next program. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.